She had always loved music. From the smallest sound of the wind through the trees to the quiet hum of the city at night, every sound seemed like it carried a rhythm, a note, or a story. But more than anything, she loved the piano. There was something about the smooth keys, the way they seemed to respond to every little touch, that made her feel alive. She wasn't a professional musician. She had never had formal lessons. In fact, most of the people around her thought of her love for music as a hobby, a pastime for someone with too much imagination. But to her, it was life itself. Every evening, she would find a corner somewhere in the city where a piano stood, sometimes in a small music shop, sometimes in a hotel lobby, and sometimes in a quiet hall left open for practice. She would sit and play for hours, letting her fingers move freely over the keys. Her hands were small, and sometimes they fumbled, sometimes the notes were off, but every time she played, she felt that magical connection between her heart and the music. One afternoon, she heard that a famous music hall was holding a small event for visitors to try the instruments backstage. It was a rare opportunity. She knew that the hall was often visited by world-class musicians, including one legendary pianist who was admired around the world. People spoke of his genius, of how his fingers moved like lightning, producing sounds that could make anyone weep or smile in a single note. She had watched videos, read articles, and even memorized some of his performances just to feel closer to the magic of what he could do. But she had never imagined she would see him in person, let alone be in the same room as him. The day she entered the music hall, her heart raced. The building itself was enormous, with high ceilings, polished floors, and chandeliers that seemed to hang like frozen stars. The smell of polished wood and old pages filled the air. She walked carefully, afraid to disturb anyone, but full of excitement she could hardly contain. She had dressed simply, wearing a plain shirt and jeans, carrying only a small bag with a notebook and a pen. But her eyes sparkled with anticipation as she looked at the grand pianos lined up in the room. They gleamed under the soft lights, their polished surfaces reflecting the wide room. When she reached the practice area, she noticed a small crowd gathered near one of the pianos. Curious, she edged closer, and there he was, the legendary pianist. He was standing tall, his posture perfect, his eyes scanning the room, and his fingers casually resting on the keys. Even from a distance, she could see the intensity in his gaze, the way he seemed to measure every sound in the room. People around him whispered, pointing discreetly, taking pictures with their phones. She felt a wave of nervousness. Here she was, an ordinary woman, about to sit and play on the same piano that someone of his level might have graced every day. She waited patiently, letting others have their turn, watching how he interacted with people. He smiled politely, but there was a sense of superiority, a quiet arrogance that made it clear he considered himself far above anyone else here. Then it happened. When the crowd thinned, she approached one of the smaller pianos, a little worn but still capable of producing a lovely sound. She hesitated for a moment, then sat down. Her fingers hovered over the keys, her heart beating fast. She took a deep breath and pressed the first note. It was simple, soft, almost shy, but as she continued, her confidence grew. The music flowed from her heart, not from technique or rules. She played a simple melody she had composed herself, a tune full of hope and quiet strength. From the corner of her eye, she noticed movement. The legendary pianist had turned his attention toward her. He walked over slowly, his eyes narrowing slightly, and for a moment, she felt exposed. She had no idea what he thought of her playing, but she felt a sudden heat in her cheeks. He stopped behind her and leaned slightly, watching her fingers move. When she finished the piece, a short pause filled the room. Then he laughed. A short, sharp, almost mocking laugh. "Is that what you call music?" he said, loud enough for the few people still lingering to hear. "I didn't know anyone still played like that. It's cute, I suppose." She froze. The warmth she had felt from playing evaporated instantly. Her fingers stiffened on the keys, and her heart sank. People around them laughed politely, unsure whether to be embarrassed or amused. She wanted to run, to hide, to disappear behind the nearest piano. She felt small, humiliated, as though all the hours she had spent practicing, all the love she had poured into her music, were meaningless in the eyes of this man whose genius was admired worldwide. For a moment, she sat silently, staring at the keys, feeling a mix of shame and anger. It wasn't just the laughter that hurt. It was the way he had dismissed her, the way he had made her feel invisible, like her efforts, her passion, her very being didn't matter. But beneath the hurt, a tiny spark of determination flickered. She refused to let his words define her. She refused to let anyone, no matter how famous, tell her what she could or could not do. She stood up slowly, trying to gather herself, but not before he added, "Maybe stick to something simpler. Music like this isn't for everyone." The words stung like ice, but they also ignited something in her. A desire to prove that music was more than technique, more than fame, more than perfection. It was emotion, expression, and courage. And she had that in abundance. As she walked away from the piano, she felt the eyes of others on her. Some looked curious, some sympathetic, and some still amused. But she didn't care. She knew that this moment, though painful, was just the beginning. It was a challenge she hadn't asked for, but one she would accept. She would return to her own practice space, to her small apartment, and pour every ounce of energy into refining her music. Not to show off, not to compete, but to honor the love she had for it, to let it shine from her heart, not just her fingers. On the way home, she replayed the scene over and over in her mind. She imagined herself playing in front of him again. Not timidly, not with fear, but boldly, with passion and skill. She imagined the sound filling the room, capturing attention, and speaking louder than words. She smiled to herself despite the lingering embarrassment. For the first time in a long while, she felt a mixture of fear and excitement. The same feeling she had felt when she first touched a piano as a child and realized music could speak when words could not. That evening, she sat at her own small keyboard in her apartment, the one she had owned for years, its keys slightly worn from years of use. She didn't play a fancy piece. She didn't try to impress anyone. She played for herself, letting her fingers move freely, letting the melody carry her heart. But this time, there was a new fire in her music. A fire fueled not just by love, but by challenge, by the sting of mockery, and by the determination to rise above it. She didn't know how long it would take, or if she would ever play in front of the legendary pianist again. She didn't even know if she wanted to. What she did know was that she would not stop. She would continue to play, continue to grow, and continue to believe in herself. One day, she promised herself, the music she created would speak for her in ways that no laughter, no mockery, and no doubt could ever silence. The night grew quiet outside her window. The city lights twinkled softly, and the hum of life carried on. Inside, she played, lost in her own world, letting each note rise and fall like waves on a gentle sea. And in that moment, she realized something important. Talent might be noticed by others, but courage, persistence, and heart were what truly made someone shine. And so her journey began. Not in grandeur, not in applause, but in quiet determination, in a small apartment, with the simple truth that music was hers, and hers alone, and that no one could take it away. After that humiliating encounter, she went home with a mix of emotions swirling inside her. Anger, embarrassment, and disappointment were strong at first, but soon they gave way to determination. She couldn't stop thinking about the pianist's mocking words. They had stung, yes, but they had also awakened something inside her. A deep desire to improve, to prove that her love for music was worth more than a passing laugh. She looked at her small keyboard in the corner of her room, the keys worn from years of playing, and a sense of purpose filled her. That night, she didn't just play a tune. She played everything she knew, experimenting with rhythms and melodies, letting her imagination take over. She tried new patterns, new sequences, anything that felt fresh. Sometimes she stumbled, hitting wrong notes or creating sounds that didn't belong. But she didn't stop. Each mistake was a lesson, each note a step forward. The next morning, she went to a small music shop nearby, one she had visited before but never spent much time in. She needed something new, an environment where she could learn, where she could be inspired. The shop was filled with pianos of all sizes and sounds, each one telling its own story. The shopkeeper noticed her wandering from one instrument to another, examining them with curiosity. He asked if she wanted to try playing, and she nodded eagerly. She sat down at a mid-sized piano, one that was a little older but had a rich, warm sound. As she played, she thought about the legendary pianist's words. She wanted to play with more confidence, with more skill, and most importantly, with more heart. She started reading music books she had ignored before, not just simple beginner guides but real techniques used by professionals. She studied finger positioning, scales, chords, and timing. Sometimes it felt overwhelming. She didn't have a teacher, no formal lessons, no one to guide her directly. But she had something just as powerful: determination and curiosity. She began setting small goals for herself. One day she would focus on mastering a specific scale, the next day on a particular rhythm, and then on combining them. She recorded her practice sessions on her phone to listen later, noticing mistakes she didn't hear while playing. Slowly, she started noticing progress. Her fingers moved more confidently over the keys, her timing became steadier, and the melodies she played sounded more complete. Some evenings were hard. There were moments when she wanted to give up, when she thought maybe she wasn't good enough, maybe the pianist had been right. But each time she felt that doubt, she reminded herself why she started. She reminded herself of the feeling of music flowing through her, the way it made her heart race and her soul feel light. That feeling was hers, and no one could take it away. One day, while playing in the shop, a kind older musician approached her. He had been watching her play for a few minutes and smiled warmly. "You have heart," he said. "Your fingers are still learning, but your music, it speaks." She felt a rush of encouragement. He didn't criticize her or laugh. He simply gave her advice, small tips on hand positioning, breathing while playing, and keeping rhythm. He suggested exercises she could do daily, ways to strengthen her fingers and improve her speed. She listened carefully, writing notes in her notebook. She started following a strict practice schedule, dedicating at least 3 hours every day to improvement. She practiced early in the morning when the city was quiet, and late at night when the streets were empty. She experimented with classical pieces, jazz improvisations, and her own melodies. Every session was exhausting, but rewarding. She noticed her confidence growing not just in music, but in herself. She began walking taller, speaking more clearly, and holding her head high. Her friends noticed the change too. They saw her commitment and determination. Some were surprised, thinking she had been timid before, unsure of her abilities. But now, they saw a fire in her, a drive that made her unstoppable. They encouraged her, sometimes clapping after hearing her play, sometimes just smiling and saying, "Keep going." Those small gestures gave her strength, but she knew the real test would come when she had to perform publicly. Meanwhile, news of a music contest at the same hall where she had been mocked reached her ears. It was open to anyone, and winners would have a chance to perform on stage for a live audience, including professional musicians. She thought about it for days. Part of her wanted to ignore it, fearing more humiliation. Another part, the stronger part, felt drawn to it, sensing it as an opportunity to show her progress, not to compete against anyone, but to prove to herself that she had grown. She decided to enter. It wasn't about revenge, she reminded herself. It was about courage, about testing her own limits, and about honoring the love she had for music. She registered for the contest quietly, avoiding attention, focusing all her energy on preparing. Each day became a countdown to that moment. She practiced relentlessly, refining the pieces she would play, experimenting with dynamics, pauses, and expression. She learned to tell a story through music, to make the audience feel the emotions she poured into each note. During this time, she also discovered the importance of mental preparation. She realized that her nerves could either help or hinder her performance. She practiced visualizing herself on stage, imagining the keys under her fingers, the music filling the hall, and the audience listening intently. She imagined herself standing confidently, playing with ease and grace. These exercises helped her reduce anxiety and focus her energy on creating music rather than worrying about judgment. As the contest day approached, her excitement mingled with nervousness. She packed her music sheets carefully, checked her instruments, and rehearsed her performance multiple times. She didn't just play the notes. She lived them. She imagined the audience, the lights, the silence before applause. She imagined every detail, preparing herself mentally and emotionally to give her best. Her practice wasn't limited to piano alone. She studied recordings of famous pianists, including the legendary one who had mocked her. She didn't copy them exactly, but she analyzed their techniques, noticing subtle finger movements, timing, and the way they expressed emotions through dynamics. She learned to blend technical skill with personal expression, creating a style that was uniquely hers. Evenings were often spent in reflection. She thought about her journey, how far she had come from that day of humiliation. She acknowledged her mistakes and weaknesses, but she also celebrated her small victories. She realized that growth didn't happen overnight. It was slow, sometimes painful, but steady. Each day of practice, each note played, each mistake corrected, brought her closer to her goal. By the end of several months, her improvement was remarkable. Her fingers moved with confidence, her pieces sounded polished, and her own compositions were evolving into expressive works of art. She felt ready to face the world, ready to step onto a stage and play not as a timid amateur, but as a musician who had dedicated herself completely to her craft. One night, she sat quietly at her keyboard after a long practice session. The city outside was silent, and the only sound was the gentle hum of her playing. She looked at the keys and felt gratitude for the opportunity to learn, for the challenges she had faced, and for the love of music that had carried her through every difficult moment. She knew that the path ahead would not be easy, that the contest could bring more judgment or even failure, but she felt a calm confidence. She had grown stronger not just as a pianist, but as a person. She remembered the legendary pianist's mocking laugh. She didn't hate him. In fact, she felt grateful in a strange way. That single moment of humiliation had pushed her beyond her comfort zone. It had sparked a determination she might never have found otherwise. She now understood that challenges, even painful ones, could reveal hidden strength. And so, she continued to practice, each note a testament to her perseverance, each melody a story of growth and courage. She wasn't just playing piano anymore. She was telling her story through music, preparing to share it with the world, one performance at a time. She didn't know exactly what would happen at the contest. She didn't know if she would impress anyone, if her music would be appreciated, or if she would face more ridicule. But she did know one thing. She had worked hard, she had grown, and she was ready to step into the spotlight with confidence, passion, and a heart full of music. That quiet determination, that unwavering commitment, and that love for music were her true strengths. No mockery, no doubt, and no fear could take them away. And with that thought, she closed her eyes, letting her fingers drift over the keys one last time before sleep, dreaming of the stage, the audience, and the music she was ready to share with the world. The day the contest was announced, she felt a strange mix of excitement and nervousness. The event was to take place in the same grand hall where the legendary pianist had mocked her. Just thinking about it made her pulse quicken. For months she had been preparing in silence, improving her technique, refining her own style, and building the confidence she had once lacked. Now, the opportunity to perform in front of an audience, including experienced musicians, was finally real. At first, she hesitated. Doubts crept into her mind. What if she wasn't ready? What if she made a mistake in front of everyone? What if he noticed her again only to laugh? But then she remembered the long nights of practice, the hours spent learning and experimenting, the small victories that had added up into something meaningful. She reminded herself that she was no longer the same timid person who had sat quietly at the piano months ago. She was stronger, more focused, and determined to show herself what she was capable of. She registered for the contest quietly, not telling anyone except a close friend who had been supporting her throughout her journey. Her friend smiled, encouraged her, and said, "You've worked hard. You deserve this. Just go and play your heart out." Those words were simple, but they lifted her spirits. She felt a warmth of reassurance she hadn't realized she needed. She wasn't doing this to impress anyone else. She was doing it for herself, to honor the time, effort, and love she had poured into music. As the contest day approached, she began rehearsing with even more intensity. She treated every practice session like a mini performance. She imagined the lights, the audience, and the grand piano she would soon sit before. She practiced walking confidently onto the stage, taking a deep breath, and lifting her hands to the keys without hesitation. She rehearsed the pieces she had chosen, blending technical skill with emotion, making sure each note told a story. She also prepared mentally. She visualized herself playing in front of a large audience, imagining the silence as everyone listened, and then the applause at the end. Sometimes she imagined mistakes too, and how she would handle them calmly. She wanted to be ready for everything, to remain composed no matter what happened. She knew the mind could be as important as the hands when performing. The night before the contest, she barely slept. She practiced one last time, running through her pieces from start to finish. She felt a mixture of tiredness and anticipation. Her fingers ached slightly, but it was a satisfying ache, the kind that comes after meaningful work. She laid out her clothes for the next day carefully, wanting to feel presentable and confident on stage, but without unnecessary attention. Everything about her preparation reflected the care and dedication she had put into this journey. When she arrived at the hall on the day of the contest, she was awed all over again. The chandeliers sparkled above, the polished wooden floors gleamed, and the stage was set with a beautiful grand piano. Contestants were already arriving, some whispering nervously, others practicing quietly in corners. She noticed many faces full of experience, young pianists in formal attire, carrying themselves with poise and confidence. She felt a flicker of nervousness but quickly reminded herself of her own journey. She belonged here too, and she had just as much right to perform. Backstage, she quietly took her place, setting her music sheets and adjusting the piano stool. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking deep breaths to calm herself. She remembered the moments of practice in her small apartment, the encouragement from her friend, and the kind advice of the older musician she had met. All of it had prepared her for this moment. She told herself she didn't need to compete with anyone. She just needed to play to let her music speak. The contest began, and one by one, participants performed. Some played with technical precision, hitting every note perfectly, but their music felt mechanical, lacking emotion. Others tried to impress with speed or complicated compositions, but the audience seemed unmoved. She watched quietly, noticing the differences between technical skill and true expression. She felt her confidence grow. She didn't need to impress with speed or complexity. She only needed to play from her heart. When her name was called, her heart jumped. She walked onto the stage, trying to maintain calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She looked at the grand piano in front of her and felt a sense of reverence. It wasn't just an instrument. It was a partner for the story she wanted to tell. She took a deep breath, sat down, and let her hands rest on the keys. The room was silent, all eyes on her. At first, she played softly, letting the notes fill the room gently. She could hear her own heartbeat, but she didn't let it disturb her rhythm. She played with intention, each note chosen carefully, each pause meaningful. She felt the music flowing from her fingers to the audience, carrying emotion and storytelling. Slowly, the audience began to lean in, sensing the sincerity and beauty of her performance. Even the legendary pianist, seated at the front, had turned his head, watching with a curious expression. As she continued, her confidence grew. She added dynamics, playing some notes more softly, others more strongly, creating waves of emotion that ebbed and flowed naturally. She let her own melodies shine, blending her technical skill with personal expression. She noticed the audience reacting subtly, nodding heads, focused eyes, quiet smiles. Each response encouraged her to play with even more heart. Halfway through her performance, a small mistake occurred. She hit a wrong note and froze for a brief second. For a moment, panic threatened to take over, but she remembered all the times she had practiced recovering from errors. She smiled slightly, adjusted her hands, and continued seamlessly. That mistake didn't ruin her performance. It made it more human, more relatable, and the audience sensed the authenticity. As she reached the final piece, she poured everything she had learned and felt into it. She played with emotion, confidence, and joy, allowing herself to become fully immersed in the music. The notes soared and fell, soft and loud, fast and slow, creating a tapestry of sound that spoke directly to the hearts of everyone listening. By the time she played the final chord, the room was silent for a heartbeat, as if holding its breath, and then erupted in applause. The sound of clapping and cheering filled the hall, and she looked up to see smiles, admiration, and even a few tears among the audience. Her heart swelled with a mixture of relief, joy, and pride. She had done it. She had shared her music authentically, and it had been received with appreciation. She realized in that moment that the journey mattered more than the result. Every hour of practice, every moment of doubt, every tiny improvement had led to this experience, and it was worth everything. After stepping off the stage, she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see the older musician who had encouraged her months ago. He smiled warmly. "You've grown so much," he said. "You've created something beautiful." His words, simple but sincere, made her eyes glisten with tears. She thanked him quietly, feeling gratitude for the support she had received along the way. Later, she noticed the legendary pianist approaching. Her heart skipped a beat, unsure of what to expect. Would he mock her again? Would he dismiss her efforts? But as he reached her, he simply nodded, a faint smile appearing on his face. "That was impressive," he said. "You've clearly worked hard. I underestimated you before." His words were honest, free of mockery. She felt a sense of validation, not because she needed his approval, but because it symbolized how far she had come. The rest of the contest continued, but she no longer focused on the other participants. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction and peace. She had entered the stage unsure of herself, and now she walked away proud of what she had accomplished. She had played not to compete, not to impress, but to express herself. She realized that music was not about perfection or recognition. It was about passion, dedication, and the courage to share one's heart. As the audience dispersed, she took a quiet moment to reflect. She thought about the journey she had taken, from the small moments of private practice to the challenge of performing in front of strangers, to the confrontation with doubt and fear. She realized that every step, every struggle, and every small victory had shaped her into the musician she had become. She felt gratitude for the experience, for the obstacles, and for the people who had supported her along the way. That evening, she walked home through the quiet streets, the city lights reflecting softly on the pavement. She carried with her a sense of accomplishment that was deeper than any applause or recognition. She had faced fear, she had worked tirelessly, and she had emerged stronger and more confident. She knew that this was only the beginning, that there would be more challenges ahead, but she also knew that she now had the strength to meet them. She returned home and sat at her keyboard one last time that night. She played a few simple notes, not to practice, not to prepare, but simply to enjoy the music she loved. She smiled, feeling a sense of completeness. The contest had been more than a performance. It had been a test of courage, resilience, and heart. She had passed it not by luck, not by skill alone, but by dedicating herself fully to the music she loved. And as she played, she felt a quiet confidence growing within her. She knew that no matter what happened next, no matter who doubted her or laughed at her, she would continue to play. She would continue to practice, to learn, and to grow. She would continue to share her music with the world, because that was who she was. She was not just a pianist. She was a storyteller, a dreamer, and a believer in the power of persistence and heart. The day of her performance arrived. She woke up early, her mind buzzing with anticipation and nerves, yet there was a calm determination that steadied her. Months of practice, countless hours alone with the piano, and endless small victories had led to this moment. She dressed simply but neatly, wanting nothing to distract from her music. She carried her sheet music carefully and left her apartment with a heart full of hope and a mind focused on the task ahead. Arriving at the hall again, she felt the familiar awe of its grandeur. The chandeliers sparkled above, the polished floors gleamed, and the scent of wood and history filled the air. Contestants were already gathering, their faces a mixture of excitement and tension. Some whispered to each other, while others practiced quietly, their hands moving over the keys with effortless precision. She found a quiet corner and sat down, taking deep breaths to center herself. She reminded herself that this wasn't about them. It was about her, her music, and the story she wanted to tell through it. When it was finally her turn, the stage manager called her name. Her heart leaped, but she walked forward steadily, keeping her head high. As she approached the grand piano on the stage, she could see the audience settling into their seats. Faces turned toward her, some curious, some skeptical, and some friendly. She took a deep breath and sat down, letting her fingers hover over the keys. At first, the room was silent except for the soft rustling of papers and a distant cough. She pressed the first note, soft and tentative, testing the air. Then she allowed herself to relax, feeling the music flow naturally. Her fingers moved over the keys with a confidence she had earned, each note deliberate and expressive. She played a piece she had carefully chosen for this moment, one that combined technical skill with emotion. It was a melody full of hope, tension, and quiet strength. As she continued, she noticed the audience reacting. Heads tilted slightly, eyes focused, and some leaned forward in anticipation. Even the legendary pianist, seated in the front row, had turned his head, watching intently. She felt a surge of energy. It was as though the music had a life of its own, carrying both her story and the audience along with it. Each chord, each pause, each variation in tempo added depth to the performance. She could feel the emotions of the room mingling with her own, creating a shared experience that was almost tangible. Halfway through her piece, she reached a particularly challenging section. Her fingers moved quickly over the keys, shifting from delicate, soft notes to bold, powerful chords. For a moment, she felt the familiar flutter of nerves, but she didn't falter. She had practiced this section countless times, and now her preparation showed. The notes came alive, resonating through the hall. The audience was captivated, and she could feel their attention locked on her performance. She played not to impress, not to compete, but to express. Each note carried her story, the struggles, the long nights of practice, the doubts she had faced, and the courage she had found. She thought about the day the legendary pianist had laughed at her, about the embarrassment she had felt, and about the determination that had grown from it. That memory no longer hurt. Instead, it fueled her performance. She played with authenticity, with heart, and with the knowledge that her journey had made her stronger. As the final section approached, she added a flourish, a combination of speed, emotion, and precision she had developed through months of practice. The music swelled, filling the hall with a rich, layered sound. The audience leaned in, sensing the climax of the performance. She felt a moment of pure connection, a silent understanding between her and everyone listening. Music, she realized, had no barriers. It transcended experience, reputation, and expectation. It spoke directly to the soul. When she pressed the final chord, the hall was quiet for a heartbeat, as if holding its breath. Then the applause began, soft at first, then growing louder, filling the space with warmth and appreciation. She lifted her hands slowly, acknowledging the audience, her heart pounding with relief and joy. She had done it. She had shared her music fully and authentically, and it had been received with admiration. The legendary pianist stood slowly from his seat. She felt a mix of anticipation and anxiety, unsure of what to expect. He approached her, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, it was with a quiet respect she hadn't expected. "I underestimated you," he said. "Your music, it's remarkable. You've clearly worked hard, and it shows." For the first time, she saw no mockery, no superiority, just honest acknowledgement of her skill and dedication. She smiled, feeling a sense of pride that had nothing to do with validation from others. She had proven to herself what she was capable of. Other participants approached as well, offering compliments and congratulations. Some were surprised by her performance, having expected a timid or amateurish display. They were impressed not only by her technical skill, but also by the emotion she conveyed through her music. She accepted their words graciously, but internally she focused on the joy she felt from expressing herself fully. Backstage, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the quiet practice sessions in her apartment to the nervous excitement of entering the contest, every step had been a lesson in perseverance and courage. She realized that the true reward was not the applause or recognition, but the growth she had experienced along the way. She had faced fear, doubt, and mockery, and had emerged stronger, more confident, and more connected to her passion than ever before. In the days following the contest, she received invitations to perform at small events and gatherings. People were curious to hear more of her music, inspired by the performance they had witnessed. She accepted some invitations, always focusing on sharing her music authentically rather than chasing fame. Each new performance reinforced her confidence, showing her that her dedication and heart resonated with others. She also began mentoring a few younger musicians who shared her passion. She remembered her own journey, the challenges, the mistakes, the moments of doubt, and she wanted to help others navigate their own paths. She encouraged them to practice diligently, to embrace mistakes as learning opportunities, and to play with emotion and authenticity. Through teaching, she discovered a new sense of fulfillment, seeing the spark of understanding and joy in their eyes. Her relationship with the legendary pianist also changed. He occasionally offered advice and encouragement, acknowledging her unique style and emotional depth. Though they were very different in approach and experience, there was mutual respect. She no longer felt intimidated or embarrassed by him. Instead, she felt grateful for the indirect role he had played in motivating her to grow and refine her skills. Music became more than a hobby or a passion. It became a part of her identity. She played not just for herself, but to connect with others, to tell stories without words, and to evoke emotions that transcended ordinary conversation. Every note she played carried meaning, every melody reflected her journey, and every performance was an opportunity to share a piece of her heart with the world. Looking back, she understood that the journey had been as important as the destination. The mockery she had faced, the challenges she had overcome, and the months of relentless practice had shaped her into the musician she had become. She had learned that perseverance, dedication, and authenticity mattered more than talent alone, and that courage could turn humiliation into strength. She also realized that fear was a companion she would always carry, but it no longer controlled her. She had learned to face it, to use it as fuel, and to continue moving forward despite uncertainty. Every time she sat at the piano, she embraced the nervousness, the excitement, and the possibility of mistakes, knowing that they were all part of the journey toward becoming the musician she wanted to be. Her story began to inspire others in subtle ways. People who had been hesitant to pursue their passions, who had faced criticism or doubt, found encouragement in her journey. They saw that determination and heart could overcome obstacles, and that growth often came from the challenges one faced rather than the accolades one received. She never sought recognition or fame, but the impact of her perseverance and authenticity resonated quietly yet powerfully. One evening, after a long day of teaching and practicing, she sat quietly at her piano, reflecting on everything she had experienced. The hall was empty, the city outside her window was calm, and the only sound was the gentle hum of the music she created. She felt a deep sense of contentment. She had faced fear, taken risks, and shared her heart through music. She had been judged, laughed at, and underestimated, but she had emerged stronger, confident, and true to herself. And in that moment, she realized something important. Music was more than notes on a page, more than technical skill, more than recognition or praise. Music was courage, perseverance, heart, and the willingness to express oneself authentically. She had discovered not only her own talent but also her own strength, and that realization was more powerful than any applause or accolade she could ever receive. The legendary pianist, the contest, and the audience had all played a role in her journey, but the most important part had always been her own commitment, her own determination, and her own love for music. She knew that her journey was far from over, that there would always be more challenges, more performances, and more opportunities to grow. But she also knew that she now had the courage, skill, and heart to face them. She played a final note that evening, letting it linger in the quiet room. It was soft, but filled with meaning, a reflection of her journey, her growth, and the courage she had discovered within herself. She smiled, feeling a sense of peace and accomplishment that words could not capture. The journey had been long and difficult, but every step had been worth it. And as she stood up from the piano, she carried with her a quiet confidence, knowing that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would continue to play, continue to grow, and continue to share her music with the world, with heart, courage, and authenticity. After the performance, she felt a quiet sense of triumph that went beyond applause or recognition. She had done more than play a piano piece. She had told her story, shared her heart, and shown herself what she was capable of. The applause, the whispers of admiration, and the respectful nods from her fellow contestants were all meaningful, but what mattered most was the sense of accomplishment that filled her from within. She had faced fear, faced doubt, and stepped into the spotlight fully prepared, and that had changed her forever. In the days that followed, the response to her performance spread quietly but steadily. People who had attended the contest spoke of the woman who had played with emotion, skill, and courage. They shared their surprise at the depth of feeling she brought to the music, the authenticity that made her stand out among trained and polished competitors. Messages began arriving, some from musicians wanting to collaborate, others from small venues inviting her to perform, and some from young music students who had been inspired by her story. She read each message with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. It was one thing to feel proud of herself, and another to see that others were touched by what she had shared. She realized that music could create connections in ways words could not, could inspire, encourage, and even heal. And she understood that the journey she had taken, from nervous practice to confident performance, had given her more than skill. It had given her the ability to reach others through her art. The legendary pianist, who had once mocked her, approached her again one afternoon. This time, there was no tension, no superiority in his demeanor. Instead, he offered advice and guidance, sharing insights from his own decades of experience. "Your playing has grown so much," he said. "You have a style that is uniquely yours, and you've learned to express it with heart. That is rare." She listened attentively, grateful for his words. She realized that even criticism, when balanced with respect, could become a tool for growth. Their relationship had changed. There was now mutual respect, a recognition of effort and talent rather than reputation alone. She continued to practice diligently, not because she had to, but because she loved the process. Each day brought new challenges, new pieces to explore, and new ways to express herself. She experimented with improvisation, composing melodies that reflected her emotions and experiences. The small apartment where she had first begun her journey now felt like a studio, a place where creativity and determination intertwined. She often lost track of time while playing, so absorbed in the music that the hours slipped by unnoticed. She also began mentoring others, particularly those who were shy or hesitant like she had been. Young musicians, unsure of their abilities, came to her for guidance. She shared not only techniques but also the lessons she had learned about perseverance, courage, and believing in oneself. She encouraged them to embrace mistakes as opportunities, to play from the heart, and to trust the journey. Seeing their growth and excitement brought her joy, a reminder that her own struggles could serve a greater purpose. Performances became more frequent. She played at small gatherings, charity events, and local concerts. Each performance was an opportunity to connect with her audience, to share a story, and to explore new facets of her musical expression. She was no longer playing for validation. She played for the experience, for the joy of creating something that could move others, and for the fulfillment it brought her personally. She discovered that the more sincerely she played, the more the audience responded, not to her skill alone, but to the authenticity of her expression. One afternoon, she received an invitation to perform at a larger venue, a place known for hosting skilled and renowned musicians. The invitation was exciting but intimidating. The hall was grand. The audience expected professional-level performances, and the stakes felt higher than ever. But she remembered the journey that had led her here, the mockery she had faced, the months of practice, and the confidence she had built through perseverance. She realized that preparation, heart, and authenticity were her strengths, and she resolved to rely on them fully. When the day arrived, she performed with the same focus and passion that had carried her through the contest. The audience was attentive, drawn into the emotion and narrative of her music. As she played, she noticed faces lighting up with surprise, admiration, and even tears. She understood then that her music was creating experiences that went beyond technical skill. It was speaking directly to the hearts of the listeners. Every note became a bridge, connecting her story to theirs. After the performance, she was approached by audience members and fellow musicians who wanted to discuss her pieces, ask questions, and share their admiration. She listened with humility and gratitude, always mindful that her journey had not ended, but had only expanded. Every encounter, every conversation, and every shared experience reinforced her belief in the power of music and the value of perseverance. Her life began to change in subtle ways. Opportunities opened up, not because she sought fame, but because people recognized her dedication and sincerity. Invitations to collaborate with other musicians, to play at events, and to share her story came naturally. She accepted them selectively, choosing experiences that aligned with her values and her love for music rather than chasing accolades. Each opportunity became a chance to learn, grow, and express herself authentically. She also began reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. She remembered the day she had first been mocked by the legendary pianist, the embarrassment that had burned in her chest, and the determination that had taken root afterward. She realized that moment, painful as it had been a turning point. It had challenged her, motivated her, and forced her to rise above doubt and fear. Without it, she might never have discovered the strength, resilience, and skill that she now possessed. Her story began to inspire others. Friends, family, and even strangers were drawn to the narrative of a woman who had faced ridicule, worked tirelessly, and emerged with confidence and talent. They saw in her an example of what could be achieved through perseverance and passion. Young musicians wrote to her, saying that her journey encouraged them to practice more, to take risks, and to believe in themselves even when others doubted them. She realized that her experiences, though deeply personal, had the power to create ripples of encouragement for others. Over time, she developed a deeper understanding of success and fulfillment. It was no longer about recognition, awards, or applause. Success, she realized, was about commitment, growth, and the courage to share one's gifts authentically. Every note she played, every piece she composed, and every student she mentored became part of a larger journey, one of self-discovery, expression, and impact. She felt gratitude for the challenges she had faced, the people who had supported her, and the moments of doubt that had taught her resilience. She continued to explore her musical voice, experimenting with new genres, improvisation, and original compositions. She collaborated with other musicians, learning from their experiences and sharing her own insights. Each collaboration brought new perspectives, new challenges, and new joy. She discovered that music was not only a personal journey but also a communal experience, a way to connect, inspire, and grow alongside others. Years passed, and she became known in her community as a musician who played with heart and authenticity. Her journey from humble beginnings to respected performer was a quiet but powerful story of courage, dedication, and growth. She never forgot the lessons she had learned along the way, the importance of perseverance, the value of heart over recognition, and the transformative power of facing fear with determination. She occasionally crossed paths with the legendary pianist again. Their encounters were different now, marked by mutual respect rather than judgment or hierarchy. He recognized her growth, and she acknowledged the indirect role he had played in motivating her journey. They shared insights, discussed music, and occasionally performed together, blending his technical mastery with her expressive style. The relationship that had begun with mockery had evolved into one of mentorship, collaboration, and respect. Looking back, she saw that every challenge she had faced, the mockery, the doubt, the difficult hours of practice, had shaped her not only as a musician but as a person. She had learned resilience, focus, humility, and courage. She had discovered that the true value of her journey was not in applause or accolades, but in the growth, expression, and impact she created through her music. She also realized that her journey was ongoing. There would always be new challenges, new pieces to master, and new opportunities to share her music. She no longer feared mistakes or failure, understanding that they were part of the process, essential for learning and growth. Each performance, each composition, and each interaction with others became part of a lifelong journey of exploration, creativity, and connection. Her story became an inspiration for anyone facing doubt, criticism, or fear. She showed that perseverance, dedication, and passion could transform obstacles into opportunities. She reminded others that talent alone was not enough. Courage, heart, and authenticity were equally essential. Her journey was proof that growth often comes from adversity, and that resilience could turn even the harshest criticism into fuel for success. One evening, after a long day of practice and mentoring, she sat quietly at her piano. The city outside her window was calm, the lights soft and reflective. She played a melody that had become her signature, a piece that captured her journey, the struggles, the determination, the victories, and the growth. The music flowed effortlessly, each note carrying the essence of her experiences. She felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that she had embraced her journey fully and authentically. And as she finished the final note, she realized that the journey she had embarked upon months ago, the journey that had begun with mockery, doubt, and embarrassment, had led her to a place of strength, confidence, and purpose. She had learned to play not only with skill but with heart. She had learned that music was more than sound. It was courage, expression, and connection. She smiled softly, her hands resting gently on the keys. She knew that the path ahead would continue to bring challenges, opportunities, and growth. But she also knew that she was ready, that she had the resilience, dedication, and heart to face whatever came next. Her journey was not just about music. It was about life, courage, and the power of following one's passion with authenticity and determination. And in that quiet, reflective moment, she felt an unshakable sense of fulfillment. She had taken the first step timidly, faced doubt and ridicule, worked tirelessly, and emerged stronger, braver, and more capable than she had ever imagined. The music she created would continue to inspire, to touch hearts, and to reflect the strength, courage, and authenticity that had defined her journey.